Welcome to Congress in Context. Today we're taking a deep dive into the daily pulse of Washington. We're looking specifically at the Congressional Record from June 4th, 2025.
Yeah, that's our source material. It really gives us a window into, the debates, the votes, the actions that were keeping representatives and senators busy on that one day.
And our mission here, really tailored for you, is to quickly cut through all the noise, unpack the key legislative stuff, understand the political forces, and maybe see what these discussions could actually mean for you.
Exactly. Think of it as getting the core insights without needing to read hundreds of pages of official jargon.
Okay, let's jump right in then. How about we start with some key legislative action? On the House side, I saw some movement involving the Small Business Administration, the SBA.
Right. Yeah, the record shows two specific bills popped up related to the SBA. First, there's H.R. 2966. That one would require anyone applying for certain SBA loans to actually provide proof of citizenship
Okay,
documentation.
and the second one?
That was H.R. 2987. It proposed putting a limit on the number of companies the SBA can authorize to make these small business loans.
And what's interesting, procedurally speaking, is the source indicates both of these were considered under a special House resolution, HRES 458. It basically smoothed the path, right? Waived points of order.
That's right. That kind of waiver is, well, it's a pretty common tool. They use it to manage floor debate, manage the votes, especially when they think procedural challenges might otherwise just slow things down.
Makes sense. Now, moving to what seemed like a major legislative event took up a lot of time and attention in the House. That was the debate and vote on the Support for Patients and Communities Reauthorization Act of 2025, H.R. 2483.
Oh, definitely. This is a significant piece of legislation. It's aimed squarely at tackling the ongoing opioid crisis. It basically reauthorizes and updates a whole bunch of federal programs, things focused on prevention, treatment, and recovery support.
And the source points out several key things this bill covers. For instance, it includes stuff designed to prevent overdoses, mentions supporting testing for really dangerous things like fentanyl and xylazine, which are often mixed in.
It also tackles the spread of infectious diseases linked to drug use. And there's support for individuals and families dealing with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD. It authorizes quite a bit of funding there, actually, about $505 million a year from FY 2026 to 2030.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah, and it also gives states more choice, more flexibility in how they run their prescription drug monitoring programs, the PDMPs. Those are the tools used to track opioid prescriptions, trying to prevent misuse.
And it keeps going, doesn't it? I saw provisions for training first responders.
Yep, they're often on the front lines.
Support for the Child Traumatic Stress Initiative, protecting the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, studies on trauma monitoring, even reviewing how certain addiction treatment meds are scheduled.
Right. Things like buprenorphine and naloxone. It also keeps supporting residential treatment, especially for pregnant and postpartum women. And it authorizes increased funding for programs building communities of recovery. That's up to $17 million a year. And also for peer support technical assistance, up to $2 million annually. So yeah, a really broad approach. Hits a lot of different angles of the crisis.
So given how comprehensive it sounds, how did the votes actually go in the House for this reauthorization? Was it smooth sailing?
Well, the record shows it was actually pretty tight. First, there was a key procedural vote, ordering the previous question, basically sets up the final vote. That passed by a really narrow margin, just a few votes separating them.
That procedural closeness often signals a tough fight on the actual bill.
Yeah, right, it usually does. And that's what happened here. The bill itself, H.R. 2483, also passed the House, but again, by a narrow margin. It really reflects the intense debate around it, even though, the opioid crisis is something with bipartisan roots.
That's fascinating. Even a reauthorization for a national crisis sparks such a close vote.
It really highlights how the specific policy details and just the political dynamics of the moment can influence even areas you'd think would be less controversial.
Okay, so while that's happening in the House, what's going on across the Capitol? The source indicates the Senate was really focused on something different, a massive piece of legislation they were calling a reconciliation bill.
Yes, and that term, reconciliation bill, is absolutely key here. It refers to a special legislative process. It's tied to the budget. It's designed to fast-track certain bills, ones affecting spending, revenues, the debt limit, and crucially, it lets bills pass the Senate with just a simple majority, bypasses the usual 60-vote filibuster hurdle.
Ah, right. That's why it's often the vehicle for these huge, really controversial economic policy changes. And based on the source, Controversial seems like an understatement for this one.
Absolutely. You have proponents painting this picture of a bill that's going to unleash American economic growth, energy dominance. They use these sweeping terms like largest tax cut, largest spending cut, largest investment in border security and defense in history, plus a massive commitment to unlocking energy resources.
Okay, that's the pitch. But the opponents.
They're using equally strong language, just in the opposite direction, calling it a tax scam bill. One source even quoted someone calling it a disgusting abomination. The claim is that it funnels huge tax breaks to corporations and billionaires, but pays for it by cutting vital social programs.
So that's the core disagreement. Where specifically did opponents say the cuts would hit?
They specifically pointed to healthcare programs, Medicaid, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act subsidies, warning that millions could lose coverage, that healthcare systems, especially rural hospitals, might even collapse. And they also hit hard on cuts to food assistance, SNAP, which one member called a lifeline, providing maybe $6 a day.
And the debt, usually a big talking point.
Huge disagreement there, too. Proponents claimed it would actually reduce the deficit, maybe modestly. Opponents fired back, saying, no, this thing adds nearly $3 trillion to the national debt. Stark contrast.
So what were some of the specific provisions being debated that illustrate this divide?
Well, the source details quite a few. Proponents highlighted things like boosting the child tax credit to $2,500 per child, raising the standard deduction, creating new savings accounts for newborns, a deduction on Social Security benefits. They talked about permanently increasing the small business deduction to 23%, allowing 100% immediate expensing for businesses, raising the death tax exemption significantly, and cutting taxes on tips and overtime.
And on the energy front, what were they pushing?
They emphasized repealing over $500 billion in spending. They linked to the Green New Deal, boosting domestic mineral development, and ending mandates and subsidies for electric vehicles.
Okay, and the opponents countered all that.
Their focus was really on who benefits. They argued these tax cuts overwhelmingly favor the wealthiest individuals and large corporations, while the spending cuts land squarely on healthcare access and assistance programs that lower and middle-income families rely on. Just fundamentally different views on economic priorities.
It's clear this bill, or framework, was designed to fundamentally reshape huge parts of the economy and government spending. No wonder the debate was so polarized.
And beyond these really big legislative items, the congressional record for that day also shows, the usual flow of other bills and resolutions being introduced, things touching on really diverse topics.
Like what? Give us a flavor.
Okay, there was H.R. 3714 about forage fish, H.R. 3715 dealing with whether wages paid to unauthorized aliens should be deductible, H.R. 3717 about an invasive species, the golden mussel, and even resolutions like H.R.S. 470 commemorating the Tiananmen Square massacre anniversary.
Right. It gives you a sense of just the sheer breadth of issues that come before Congress every single day, even when these massive legislative fights are sucking up all the oxygen.
Exactly. It shows Congress isn't only about the huge high-profile stuff. It's also where hundreds of very specific, sometimes pretty niche issues get formally put into the legislative pipeline.
And speaking of high profile, let's dive back into those political dynamics, the speeches captured in our source.
Wow. As we saw with the reconciliation bill, the rhetoric was incredibly sharp. Deep partisan divides on display.
Oh, absolutely. The language opponents used to describe that bill was striking. Beyond just scam, you heard terms like cruel and morally bankrupt, an abomination, immoral, a damn disgrace. They really framed those potential cuts to healthcare and food aid as having devastating impacts on vulnerable people.
Yeah, and the debate around SNAP, the food assistance program, seemed particularly intense. One side was pushing back hard against the idea it's full of waste, fraud, and abuse, really emphasizing its role as a lifeline. And they were sharply criticizing what they saw as, well, callous responses from the other side about the cuts, like claims Republicans were saying, we are all going to die in response, calling that outrageous. Meanwhile, proponents of the reconciliation bill were pushing back just as forcefully, calling those accusations misinformation, arguing their goal wasn't to dismantle programs but to make sure they're efficient, targeted to those who really need them, and, yes, preventing waste, fraud, and abuse.
We also saw the Support Act reauthorization, even with its bipartisan roots, get tangled up in partisan criticism, didn't we?
We did. One member, according to the source, really laid into the previous administration, accused them of, quote, gutting federal agencies and programs dealing with mental health and substance abuse, specifically naming SAM-HSA, even while Congress was trying to reauthorize these very programs.
Kind of a contradiction, they argued.
Exactly. They expressed frustration, saying colleagues on the other side were saying not a damn thing about those alleged cuts, framing it as inconsistent given the ongoing opioid crisis.
Immigration policy also popped up in the debates, not just new bills. That proposed Save SBA from Sanctuary Cities Act. That sparked a clear divide.
Yeah. Proponents argued it was necessary to protect American businesses from the negative impacts they saw from sanctuary policies. They framed it as standing up against lawlessness. But opponents shot back that the bill was just punitive, targeting cities and immigrant communities for political points, not based on sound policy.
And then there was the whole discussion around the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, led by Elon Musk. That got quite a bit of back and forth.
It did. Proponents were highlighting DOGE's mission to find and cut waste, fraud, and abuse. They cited these specific, almost kind of quirky examples from the source, like rescinding $4 million for legume research or $3 million for an Iraqi version of Sesame Street.
Trying to show concrete savings, I guess. But the opponents...
They voiced some serious concerns, worries about DOGE's really broad mandate, its access to sensitive data. The source specifically mentioned Social Security information. They were questioning the motives behind it, worrying it wasn't just about efficiency, but maybe privatization or targeting certain groups. Someone even jokingly called them the DOGE boys.
And the Senate side, the record showed political tensions simmering around nominations too, right?
Yes, senators were debating the whole confirmation process. Some expressed frustration, feeling like there was a rush to just rubber stamp nominees, including some rated not qualified by groups like the American Bar Association. They saw it as the Senate kind of abandoning its advice and consent role.
And we saw that play out specifically.
Yeah, the source mentions a cloture vote that's the procedure to end debate and force a final vote on the nomination of James O'Neill for Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. It passed, but narrowly, 51-46, allowing the nomination to move forward.
There was also specific criticism aimed at a Federal Reserve governor.
Right, Governor Bowman. Critics brought up her record on bank regulations, specifically pointing to her vote to lift an asset cap on Wells Fargo, and they tried to link that decision to the bank failures that happened back in 2023. It shows how these confirmation debates can become platforms for arguing about broader policy, in this case, financial regulation.
And the immigration theme came up again in the context of enforcement and safety.
It did. There were claims mentioned in the source about a big surge in assaults on ICE officers recently, and reports of specific arrests in places like Nashville described as criminal illegal aliens being framed as successful public safety actions, often tied into that debate about sanctuary cities.
So many different policy areas, immigration, safety, federal agencies, all becoming these flashpoints reflecting the bigger political divides.
Exactly. It really illustrates how these larger ideological battles play out across the whole spectrum of government activity.
It's easy to get caught up in all these sharp partisan clashes. They're certainly loud. But did the source material offer any glimpses of maybe cooperation or just different kinds of congressional activity happening alongside the big fights?
It did, actually. While those big debates were definitely polarized, it's worth remembering the Support Act, the opioid bill. Despite that tight reauthorization vote, it was built on a bill that originally passed with significant bipartisan support back in 2018. And even during this recent debate, some members explicitly called for getting back to that bipartisan spirit.
It's a really important point. Even in this climate, the potential for common ground isn't completely gone.
And maybe even more revealing about the day-to-day work that often flies under the radar. The record dedicates a lot of space to members just recognizing people, groups, and events back in their home states and districts.
Ah, right. That's a totally different side of Congress. Not legislating, but representing, connecting back home.
Precisely. You see members paying tribute to folks like a beloved college football coach, a veteran who dedicated their life to public service, people raising funds for a veterans memorial, celebrating retiring staffers who've put in years of public service, honoring community volunteers, successful local businesses, churches, D-Day survivors, artists, entrepreneurs, just a whole range.
It really highlights that representative function, doesn't it? members using floor time to connect with their communities, honor achievements.
Right.
It shows a side of legislative life that's pretty far removed from the partisan gridlock we hear so much about.
It's this constant weaving together, isn't it? The national policy fights and these very local, very human connections.
Okay, let's try to pull back now, connect these legislative and political threads to the bigger picture. What does this single day's record tell us about the potential impact of all these discussions, and maybe about the processes themselves?
Well, the source really lays out the potential real-world effects, at least as argued by the different sides. So on one hand, if opponents of that big reconciliation bill are right, you could see millions facing loss of access to really essential healthcare Medicaid, Medicare. Food assistance through SNAP could be significantly cut back. That directly impacts people's ability to afford basics, right?
And those cuts, they argued, could really strain the whole healthcare system, maybe even lead to hospital closures, especially in rural areas, and shift costs onto private insurance.
That's the fear they expressed. And for businesses, especially small businesses, that bill proposed major tax changes, new expensing rules. Proponents say that'll spur investment. Opponents might see challenges. And that Save SBA from Sanctuary Cities bill, if it passed, could literally force businesses needing SBA help in those cities to think about relocating.
Energy policy debates seem to hint at shifts in consumer energy costs, too, depending on which approach wins out.
Definitely. And the discussion around the Support Act reauthorization, when you put it next to the criticisms about cuts at agencies like SAMHSA, well, it raises questions about the overall effectiveness of the nation's response to the opioid crisis, even as specific programs get renewed on paper.
And the whole DOGE controversy, it wasn't just about government efficiency, was it? There were real concerns about data privacy, given their access to Social Security data.
Significant concerns, yeah. Potential impacts beyond just cutting waste. And of course, that fundamental economic debate baked into the reconciliation bill framework, totally different claims about where it leaves the national debt and economic growth down the road.
Thinking about the process side, what insights did this day give us into how the legislative machine actually grinds away?
Well, we clearly saw the House floor operating under specific rules, often using those special resolutions to manage debate, streamline votes, like with the SBA bills and the Support Act. It's a very structured environment for that debate and voting phase.
And the Senate, at least on this particular day, seemed heavily focused on its constitutional advice and consent role, right? Debating nominations, using procedures like cloture to move things along.
Yeah, comparing the two chambers on any given day often shows these different operational rhythms and priorities. And the record is a good reminder that behind all the floor action, there's crucial work happening in committees, hearings, markups that lays all the groundwork.
And all of this, it connects back to these much larger ongoing debates, doesn't it? About the fundamental role of government, how much it should spend, how it should tax, where power should sit, federal versus state, for example.
Exactly. This one day's record just vividly illustrates that intense partisan division shaping policy on core economic and social issues, and it really puts a spotlight on the specific federal agencies and programs at the heart of these fights. SNAP, Medicaid, the EPA, the Fed, SBA, SAMHSA.
So looking ahead then, based on this snapshot from June 4th, what does it suggest might be coming next in Washington?
Well, the bills that actually passed the House, like the Support Act, could potentially move over to the Senate for consideration, and all those components debated under the reconciliation bill umbrella. That signals a major legislative push is underway, with the potentially huge implications if it moves forward. And Senate debates, votes on nominations, those will definitely continue.
And the tone suggests we should probably expect continued, pretty intense conflict over these big issues. Federal spending, the social safety net, taxes, immigration, regulation. The sharp rhetoric doesn't seem likely to just fade away.
Probably not anytime soon. And the potential consequences that were laid out in the source material, those impacts on individual health care, the national debt, the scope of government services they suggest, the outcomes of these ongoing battles, could really reshape significant parts of our policy landscape for years to come, depending on which arguments, which policies ultimately prevail.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it really is quite remarkable, isn't it, to see the whole spectrum of activity in Congress just on a single day, from these sweeping national policy fights down to, heartfelt local tributes.
It's definitely a complex ecosystem, and getting even this snapshot hopefully provides some valuable insight into the forces and issues that are shaping policy right now.
Absolutely. This was just one day, but it offers a real window into the priorities of processes.
And we hope this helps you feel a bit more informed, maybe encourages you to explore the topics that particularly resonated with you.
And you absolutely can dig deeper. Use the resources that were even mentioned in the source. Websites like congress.gov are just invaluable. You can find the actual text of the bills we talked about, track where they are in the process, look up info on hearings, committee actions.
It's all there. And it's always possible to contact your own representatives and senators directly about the issues you care about. Their contact info is easy to find online.
Right. And staying engaged, it means more than just reading headlines, doesn't it? It's about understanding the process, finding ways to make your voice heard, whether that's contacting members, following hearings, or other kinds of civic activities.
Just knowing where to look for upcoming votes or debates on issues that matter to you is a really key step.
So, as you reflect on everything we've covered today, the clashing visions of government, the debates over who really benefits from policy, those raw political dynamics, maybe consider this final thought. How might the fundamental disagreements we saw highlighted in these debates over things like taxes, social programs, regulation, how might those shape the future policies that actually impact your daily life and your community?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the congressional record.
Until next time.